It's the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Glad you're spending some time with us. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi, Alain.
Hey, good morning, everyone, on such a beautiful, sunny, wonderful day.
And with us for this special edition is Marjory Blumenthal, Senior Policy Researcher at the RAND Corporation. Thanks for being here with us again, Marjory.
My pleasure.
Marjory, it's so great to have you, especially on this so important topic.
Right. You have another very significant report out titled Safe Enough, Approaches to Assessing Acceptable Safety for Automated Vehicles. Let's talk first about the overview here and what you're focusing on. First of all, I guess we can make it clear that you're talking about really driverless vehicles, not the safety equipment vehicles.
Correct. Okay. Thinking about level 4 into level 5, but yes, driverless vehicles. And our goal was to understand different ways of thinking about how you would assess and communicate the safety of these vehicles.
Yeah, and of course, I think at least what I took from your report, which was, of course, excellent, is that you are focused on driverless.
Right.
And in some sense, I think I've also said maybe you should have had that in the title too, because when we talk about AVs, who knows? You pick up the Sunday supplement, you don't even know what you're talking about, and there's so much conflation between what's going on over here, what's going on over there, person in a loop, not in a loop, blah, blah, blah. And of course, I never liked level 5 because it has the word everywhere in there. And I mean, come on. I mean, this is never going to be everywhere. So it's not whatever, but it is driverless. And you do also very much point out in an operational design domain.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, we need to say that up front, because otherwise, if we don't say those things up front, some people, I don't know where they go.
Well, Marjory, in your key findings, you're saying different approaches to assessing AV safety complement each other, and there isn't a single best approach. What are some of the approaches that you looked at, and explain what you're saying here?
Sure. For a lot of people, they would love to have a simple number, for example. They would love to have a measurement. People are comfortable with what exists for conventional vehicles, which is things like crash statistics. But in the absence of things like that, which we've termed lagging measures, there are alternatives. You can come up with leading measures, and there has been some evolving work in that area. Some of the instances are not 100% satisfactory, but people are doing more research. And beyond measures, because of their intrinsic limitations, there are a couple of other things that you can do. You can look at how the developer is addressing key processes of different kinds. And you can combine measures and processes to see whether a vehicle is above some kind of threshold, which can be either more quantitative or more qualitative. And we expect that with improvement in these evaluation techniques, we'll end up with a steady progression of better measures, better processes or ways to evaluate process adherence, and more meaningful thresholds. And the cycle is going to repeat over time, because the whole process, developing the vehicle, the qualities of the vehicle, and developing our ways to evaluate the vehicle, all of that is evolving together and will continue for the foreseeable future.
So along those lines, I mean, there are so many things, so many points you bring out in this report, so many absolutely, of course, wonderful things that it would take us days to really go through them, because this is the fundamental critical question. And it's a critical question not only on the regulatory side, on the customer side, on the manufacturer side, on the liability. This is the central question. And of course, it also boils down to that. It ends up being perception. It's not a bunch of facts. It's how those facts, how those things are going to be perceived by the entities up here that end up saying yay or nay or whatever on whichever end of the things that they are. So you have to, it has to be not only technical, but it has to be, as I like to say, sociological on the other end. And those two things need to come together in some harmony, right? Say a little bit about that. You do go through it extremely well in there. So can you tell us a little bit more, or say a little bit more?
Sure. So at the highest level, we're talking about approaches both to evaluating and to communicating about safety. And one of the things that we dug into was the psychology of people as they process information. I mean, for example, if you think about the health domain where there is also safety, we talk about food additives as generally recognized as safe. That puts an emphasis on the safe part. It doesn't say that there is a definable risk, although there is a definable risk that you might suffer from ingesting this food. So one of the things we pointed out is that in addition to thinking about and communicating about risk, it's important to communicate about benefits as well. And this can be done in different ways, but certainly in terms of talking about the potential for driverless vehicles to improve, saying the positive things as well as talking about the risk of an adverse event is very important. And there is some literature in the safety community that makes a comparison between talking about benefits as opposed to talking about risks. But we definitely argued for both of those.
Personally, I think that is extremely important here. I mean, any decision is based on a trade-off between risk and reward. When you get right down fundamentally to it, whether, we get out of bed in the morning, take a step forward, have a cup of coffee, and you point some of these things out. And of course, when I try to talk about this, nowhere near as well as you do it. Nowhere near. I really try to focus on the fact that one has to look at the risk and reward. And in a sense, that's why it's important to look at the driverless piece separately from the other piece. Because the reward of the at least my contention, or at least some people, the reward of the driverless piece is you might have the opportunity with driverless to provide mobility affordably to a whole bunch of folks who don't already have it. It's not that we're going to use them as guinea pigs or anything like that, but until you pull the driver, make that decision, you're stuck. You got to pay the Uber driver, and the Uber driver deserves a living wage. Okay? So if their fare isn't going to be that, then you better tip him. Okay? Or her. All right. Whether they're an employee or not employee, as I, also pointed out in this thing, I pay for my health insurance at Princeton University. They don't give it to me. Kidding me? They didn't give me that. They'd have to pay me more. Okay. So whether or not, you force them one way or another, that has to be part. The only way I contend that we can even approach have the possibility of providing affordable mobility is to be able to pull the driver, is to replace the computer, which because of Moore's law, his cost goes to zero, with one of us.
Alan, the concept of autonomous vehicles, truly autonomous vehicles, driverless, is often sold to the public and probably legislators as well, regulators, sold on the basis that they're not looking at mobility for all. What they're looking at is this is going to be so much safer. the vehicles are paying attention 100% of the time, they're going to be better than we are. Is that a mistake?
Well, I want Marjory to answer that, but I'll throw in my thought of that. I mean, the thing that I throw in at this is, the 94% or whatever the number that we all quote about, and looking backwards, as you say, looking at the data as to why we have those kinds of crashes is because of human error. Bull, it's human, misbehavior. And it should be called misbehavior. Okay? You're speeding, you're drinking, you're sleeping, you're texting, you're whatevering. Okay? That's the 94%. And of course, I think we can write code so it doesn't text, so that it doesn't speed, so that it doesn't swerve in front of you, so that, in fact, as we're discussing, sees the darn traffic light maybe, or whatever, and so on. I think so in a sense, everybody is a good driver. We'd like to talk about distribution of driving ability. What most people, I think, talk about when they talk about distributions of ability to drive is the amount of misbehavior they're going to do. They say, "Oh, teenagers are they misbehave." Damn it.
So
men are. I don't know. Go ahead. I want you to know, please. And I could be way off. All right. It's just my stupid way of looking at this.
So you've actually teed up two issues.
Yeah.
And Fred, as I think, reasonably emphasized a second. But let me not ignore your first one, which is closer to mobility for all, because I'm actually working on a smaller project that addresses that issue with a focus on older adults. And I think that the first step towards mobility for all, or serving people who are underserved today, is going to come from the economies of scale. And you talked about one of the economics aspects. But the other set of issues is also going to relate to a factor that a human driver provides that right now the AV models don't yet factor in, because they're focusing on the safety issues. And that is, how do you help somebody who has an impairment get in and out of the vehicle, especially if that person has assistive gear of some kind? So set that issue aside. I think that is an issue for the future, and we should not set it aside as a nation. But the safety.
Let me just, because you absolutely, we need to have another one on that. That in fact, when we're talking about providing mobility with automation of an automated driver, the trip inside the vehicle is only part of the trip.
Yeah.
It's getting to the place where you get in the vehicle and where you get out of the vehicle and get to where you want to go. It's the last 12 inches, people or whatever,
And the same thing would go for deliveries using automated vehicles for deliveries. How does it get to my door?
Yeah, no, that whole thing is, so I don't know. We're going to be here forever, Marjory. Go ahead. Yeah.
Continental had an exhibit at CES 2 Januaries ago.
Yeah.
And they used one of those dog-like robots to carry the package from the automated vehicle to the porch and ring the doorbell. So there will be answers to that one. But the point that Alain was talking about in terms of safety gets at one of the ways that we talked about thresholds for evaluating and communicating about safety. And if I think about the difference between what we were hearing in developing this report and what we heard a couple of years ago with the earlier report, is that in the earlier time, people talked about comparison to a human driver. And at the 50,000 foot level, everybody wants to compare to a human, because that's what we know. We are humans. But what was very clear now in this year, 2020, is that people recognize that the average driver is not a good enough comparison for all the reasons that Alain mentioned. The average driver doesn't behave well all the time, maybe on average. So you want to have that comparison to the person who is not committing all the misbehaviors that Alain listed. And then beyond that, you also want to compare in a given ODD, because the challenges that a driver is going to face, in a snowy Boston street, for example, are going to be different from, a sunny Phoenix street. It just depends.
Right. And of course, I always blame the auto manufacturers, the way they've sold us the cars before, or up it's still now. They show us the Land Rover or whatever climbing the Great Wall. Well, if the ODD includes climbing the Great Wall, well then okay, damn it, or it shows a Jeep going down some riverbed or in snow that is yo deep without even any red poles sticking up to show you where the edge might be. I mean, come on. I can't do that.
Right.
Okay. Not even, and I think I'm the best driver in the world, which of course you pointed out that we all, never mind, right? We all know that. Yeah. So, I mean, those are so important, and they have to be, to me, I think they have to be put up on top. It's this ODD. Okay. And we're not going to text. We're not going to speed excessively, or somebody will figure out what the hell the right speed is. We aren't going to go through stop sign and red lights unless there's nobody coming, because why do you stop at a red light or stop sign? Is because, you got to turn your head and so on, see if anybody's coming. But if you, and all the other things, there's some change, whatever. And we're not going to do the thing is not going to misbehave. And misbehave is not used in the literature. Everybody talks about the poor human frailties and I'm so sorry, whatever. We're misbehaving.
So that is one reason why, beginning in the earlier report and advancing through this year's research, we explored the concept of roadmanship as an integrated measure of how well does an AV behave in traffic. Does it cause a problem, not cause a problem? Does it respond appropriately? Can it behave better? And yeah. I think the idea of developing better measures of that, I think would make people more comfortable with what they're seeing.
Well, I loved your roadsmanship concept in there, and I guess I'm not as well read in the literature, but I think again, that's one of the things that needs to be up there on the mantle as part of this thing. We really have to get back to some roadsmanship on the roadways, because there are a bunch of people out there that are really misbehaving. I mean, you go and somebody else is going 10 miles under the speed limit. I mean, it's all over the darn place, and the road rage and the texting is, of course, we know that's been out of control. It's out of control, and
you're almost hazardous sometimes if you are driving the speed limit.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you are, but that's because everybody else is, and of course, I guess the speed limit's been put in there because everybody sort of knows we're going to game it. We're going to go out, so that you really can do 65, but they put up 42 because you want to, all that goofy gamesmanship.
And so the same can be said. The same could be said about autonomous vehicles. Would they be hazardous if they are sticking to the letter of the law? Yeah.
Well, I think in some situations they have at least caused complaints.
Yeah.
This gets back to people thinking about, can you use infractions? Does somebody violate a traffic rule regardless of whether the person was caught at it? And that has been considered a candidate leading measure, but a problematic one, because, as Alain's been saying, there are circumstances where you have to cross a line to avoid an accident, or there's nobody around, it's the middle of the night, and maybe it's okay if you just kept moving.
Yeah, well, this is what I say to my students. Look, the current traffic laws and the current roadsmanship that exists out there is associated with a human driver with human qualities. Okay, it's targeted. It knows that we're going to cheat a little, or I don't know why, but it's been built that way. and all those things, all those so-called sacrosanct things that we've built to somehow get the system so we only kill 40,000 a year as opposed to whatever number we would be killing, which is, we really have done pretty damn well given all the texting and all the drinking and all the stuff that goes on out there. Okay, we're really doing pretty damn well. But if it's not going to be a computer that does this, then all of a sudden, you can write code that says thou shalt not. Speed limit is a limit. There's a less than or equal to somewhere in the code. It's the only way we write code. We don't go in there, hey, human whatever, put distributions on it, they'll cheat, whatever, gamesmanship, road rage, they didn't get out of bed in the right side of the bed today, so give them a break. None of that stuff goes in whenever you're writing a code for this stuff. So we need new traffic laws. NHTSA should be out there, instead of putting asterisks on everything. I said, we should have a new one that deals with, hey, code writers, not people. Not visual and temporal cortexes. I don't talk to me here.
I think that as the fleet mix changes, for a long time, we're going to have some degree of automation while we have mostly human drivers.
Forever. I claim, we're never going to get out of that one. I'm trying to deal with the sun here. Sorry.
Sure.
It just makes you look brighter than usual.
Yeah, no. Oh, boy, I'm putting it back in there. Do I need that? My goodness. Go ahead. Sorry. We're just,
as the fleet evolves, I have a feeling that the way that code is written and implemented is also going to evolve. We talk with people from state and local government who also are on the receiving ends of grumbles from local citizens because, in fact, the test vehicles were sticking to the speed limit. And the norm in whatever the area was to go above the speed limit. And so how do you balance those things? And I think that our lived experience and then the political process of how do people respond to this, we're going to evolve in certain ways. And probably depending on the circumstances, the ODD, what is actually on the road at a given moment in time in a given place, you'll have a more adaptable approach. But we're not going to be there for a while.
Well, that norm about driving over the speed limit, I think, is pretty much everywhere, yes. Marjory. So we'll continue in just a moment, but this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, it's a good idea to read their white paper called The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under a tab called Insights and News. Great information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. ETFs, as you probably know, are a smart way to spread risk with your investments and perhaps focus on a particular category of stocks. The site, once again, is motoetf.com. We're back with Marjory Blumenthal, Senior Policy Researcher at the RAND Corporation, and we're talking about your new report titled Safe Enough: Approaches to Assessing Acceptable Safety for Automated Vehicles. Let's talk a bit more now, if we can, Marjory, about some of the recommendations that you have in here. What are some of the things at the top of the list?
So recognizing that on the government front, there has been some challenge in deciding how to move forward, getting agreement, and so on. But there are a couple of very simple recommendations that focus on the longstanding government role, federal government role, to support research. And earlier in the conversation, we talked about the need to think about what's happening on an ODD basis. The federal government can help to support development of more data and better measures that allow for the comparison between good human drivers and driverless vehicles by ODD. The federal government is also best positioned to advance research in leading measures, because you don't want to have the best measures locked up with a company, a single company, where it's a proprietary asset. You want to have measures that everybody can use so that you have comparability. Beyond that, there are ways that developers can do more. For example, when we talked about processes, one of the activities that has become more prominent recently is the development of safety cases on the part of developers. Safety cases are not new. They've been used in other industries for decades, but they've now become a thing in producing AVs. So in general, a safety case has been proprietary to a company. Companies, developers could collaborate on developing some kind of transparent, shareable template for a safety case that, again, is more consistent across companies. And that is something that is going to have to come from the industry itself. Developers.
I was going to say that the idea of having these transparent approaches with safety data. Alain, you've been talking about that for so long.
Yeah, I think of course. I think, you know, the sort of other little thing I kind of throw in there that I'm not sure that you have in there is that maybe we need some antitrust laws or something like that with respect to the industry having to do with you know, potential collusion, but the industry should not be competing on safety. The industry should be cooperating on safety. And if that requires sharing of whatever information that otherwise might be thought of as antitrust or collusion or whatever, you know, there should be some legal overlay put on that to permit that, so that, you know, one doesn't have to have 50 lawyers in there every time you go meet. I don't know, you know, these are private industries. They do have IP. That IP deserves to be protected, but they should be competing on, hey, how about giving the cheapest, best mobility safe as with it? Because again, it's in everybody's interest to be safe, and everybody's total disinterest to screw up.
Absolutely.
Right? You know, I mean, go.
So I think between the earlier report, which advocated a common framework for measuring, and this report, there are clearly so many arguments for finding a common ground to share something. And I think there are some indicators that is happening in the industry. There's a lot of reason to believe that the legal bases exist to share more, especially if it's shared in a way that is comparable. And, you know, government can help with that, but there also are a lot of consortia in the industry. You know, one of those could help lead the charge. I think there has to be the will to collective action, and then the collective action can happen. But definitely we need to have that comparability and to have some of the sharing.
Yeah, and that's really good that's in your report. If I could get to maybe my critical question, or my number one question, to me, it has to do with responsibility. Who is going to be held, or who is going to agree to accept the responsibility when something bad happens? Because something bad's going to happen, and it's very nice that you say that. It's impossible to be perfectly safe. You do a great job, and, you know, this is an asymptotic thing that we approach it, and I have all your discussions with Vision Zero, and which is all very excellent. I loved it. But if I am going to go out there and provide mobility as a service without a driver in there, I, meaning a corporation, an entity, whoever's doing that, has to make the decision to take the driver out of there. That is a monumental decision. And that, because that decision then says, to me, basically it implies that the entity, is going to take responsibility, which I also throw in there. Elon has not said that with respect to autopilot or whatever he has out there. And as soon as he does, then maybe we'll listen to him. But that's a whole other thing. You don't have to agree or disagree. Just threw that in there. I will take it out if I'm going to, I don't have anybody to point to. If I do that, I don't have NHTSA gave me a list of check boxes. I checked this one, this one, this one. I checked all those. I'm good to go. If something bad happens, I'll blame NHTSA. Okay. I don't have that. I have to say, I'm going to pull that person out there because, in fact, that's the only way that I can provide that mobility without pulling, else I would leave the person in there. Okay. And how do you do that? How does an entity reach that decision to pull that?
Okay, so I think you've asked two things.
Okay, go ahead. Interpret.
Who's responsible and how do I reach the decision?
Yeah.
On the who's responsible.
Right, good.
At the end of the day, it's mostly going to be on the company.
Yes, mostly, if not only.
Yes.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
Right.
And that is why people are looking a lot at liability. They're deciding that existing liability frameworks are likely to continue to apply, just like other legal frameworks have evolved with technology. Intellectual property rights is a great example. The framework is there. Okay. And I think that is a primary reason why all of the rosy forecasts that, by now or next year, we're going to have roads full of these things.
Right.
People have retreated. They've become more careful. There's some industry consolidation because people are sharing or shedding risk, depending on where you are in that consolidation. And all of that says there's going to be more conservative, more care in the combination of measures and processes that get you to that point where you might make the decision.
Okay, so, that's one. That's the one side. What is that? Because there's the decision they're making is basically say, look, the risk is worth the reward. Boom, we're on the other side of that sucker. Okay. Yeah. How do you get to the other? I mean, to me, that's fundamental safety. Okay. Yes. I mean, that's the fundamental. So go. Sorry to keep interrupting you.
I think at the most simple level, inside of the companies, they are combining measurements, their attention to key processes, including proliferating technical standards, safety culture, and so on. And they will be using some kind of threshold internally to say that when they add up all that other evidence, it is above some threshold. And then the baby steps will come in specific ODDs with further evaluation. I think it will be a gamble every time that it happens. But we do see announcements now that companies are beginning to pull safety drivers.
Right, at least one has. Yeah. As far as I know, only one has. Yeah. I keep saying, hoping somebody corrects me. But as far as I know, only place in the world in which the safety driver has been pulled is Chandler, Phoenix, Waymo. Nobody else. Everybody else has safety driver in there, unless they're in some test track. They're not in their ODD. Right. Anybody in an ODD that's going to provide driverless mobility to at least some entity on a public road. Okay, there might be in some Disneyland, someplace, something, and we've had them. We've had them in closed courses. Right. Yeah, I mean, we have them on railroads where you can't even go off the track unless But in a real ODD, that's why the driverless mobility for people in a situation in which you're using the public infrastructure, the roads that are continuing to be used by humans, which to me is the only case that's of any interest, because that's the benefits, that's the value side. Otherwise, without anyone, never mind. Only one. Nobody else has put the decision makers in the room and they say, hey, we're good to go.
It will happen. I mean, all it takes is one to cross that threshold.
No, we did get one. I know, and I applaud them for it. And I know nothing about the inside, how they reached it, what they did. I don't want to know anything about unless they make it public. Okay, but isn't that the critical safety question? Because they have to say at that point, we're safe enough.
Yes, that is a decision that was made, and then we're all living the experiment.
We're living the experiment. Hey,
such a key phrase, safe enough. I mean,
yeah, no, I think it's wonderful, and it's wonderful to live the experiment. As I tell my students, if I knew the future, it wouldn't be worth living. Okay. Seriously, I mean, I would know the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to go 16-0, win the Super Bowl, and so on and so forth. And Ben's going to be what I would know everything. I would know that whatever you were going to become the richest lady in the world and all that stuff and so on. It wouldn't be worth it. But the uncertainty of all that, oh man, that's worth living, isn't it? Isn't that the joy of life? I don't know. Talk to me here.
Well, so you referred earlier to the 40,000 deaths a year.
Yeah.
And we had a very interesting conversation with one of the people we interviewed who talked about the political challenge. That if over time, we go from 40,000 to 40 deaths a year, that is a huge improvement.
Yeah.
And that would be something to celebrate. But the point was made, no politician wants to say, look, we're going to have 40 deaths a year.
Yeah.
Even though the comparison is to 40,000.
Yeah.
It says something about numeracy. It also says something about psychology.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what I was saying about other domains where we know that there is some residual level of risk. It just doesn't get discussed to the same degree as what we see and hear with automobiles, because humans have so much experience driving them.
Yeah, but also we'd love to say the politicians get the heck out of here and whatever we're going to do this without you and not even listen. Although they have said that the 747 Max can go fly again. Okay, in the end, they do realize that in fact, some bad things are going to happen, whatever we do. Look at what the heck we've been doing with this pandemic. I mean, the whole business. So one can have the sort of stump speech, I guess. But in the end, maybe there's some sanity also in the political process that says, look, again, life's a risk.
And Marjorie, you talk about actually in this report the need to get involved with the local leaders, the political leaders, because that can open the door into communities, and without community support, this goes nowhere, right?
It's a combination of community support, but also public support. There's a lot of attention given to national public opinion surveys. How do you feel about AVs? Would you ride in an AV? And most of the people who respond to those surveys have never seen an AV, let alone been inside of one. So part of what led to that recommendation was the recognition that people need exposure. They need some way of understanding what is it that people are talking about with an AV. And we have such a big country that even if there was a reasonably brisk growth in the number of deployment experiments in different areas, we would not cover, a lot of the population anytime soon. So different mechanisms, even if they're temporary, to let more people see what an AV is like, I think will lead to more realistic expectations and more interest. And it is that scale factor that gets to what Alain was talking about earlier in terms of the economics of getting more of this capability out to more people. You've got to grow that scale.
Well, that's what we're facing here. So we're trying to make Trenton, New Jersey, an operational design domain for somebody, because they definitely need the mobility. The young, the old, the poor, the whatever, definitely need it. But nobody's ever seen one there. And you must have the neighborhood support. because these things are going to go through neighborhoods. They're not just going to go through the New Jersey Turnpike. I mean, cut it out, okay? And the people in the neighborhoods have to welcome these things and say, we're not going to, because they're so easy to throw a monkey wrench into, or a Molotov cocktail, or whatever you want to haul into them.
Or just jump in front of it.
Yeah, or just jump in. As I say, if I don't want to go on down Cleveland Lane here, I'll send Peggy, my dog, out there. It will stop. I'll get it jack it up, get cinder blocks, put it on cinder blocks, and steal its wheels. You know, I mean, it will be trivial. Nobody will even see me do it. You know, when we're talking about the driverless, when we're talking about providing mobility for people, you know, in that sector, which is what your report is focused on, which is so great about your report, one has to be at those levels. If one's not at those levels and one doesn't have the right perception, the welcoming perception, meaning the safe perception at those levels, it's not going to happen.
That's right. It is all about public trust, and all of these elements, getting better measures, doing more with processes, improving the thresholds,
absolutely,
comparisons, all of those things add up to get that trust and to communicate about them.
Well, that's why I loved your report. I mean, it's in its depth, its breadth, and so well put out there, and just my congratulations on it.
We should point out too that you know, NHTSA this week or very recently said it was issuing an advance notice of proposed rulemaking to get public input on ensuring the safety of future self-driving. And I mean, this is at the end of, apparently, the end of an administration going into a new one. I don't know if there's turnover at something like NHTSA to worry about here, but what does this mean?
So they did release the ANPRM yesterday. I downloaded it. I need to read it.
I do too. I do too. I haven't read it yet.
But NHTSA's had a process. It started in the previous administration, at least. It went through this administration. And there is a lot of sort of rank and file regular activity that will continue regardless of administration. But the administration will change some of the attitudes at the top. The administrator of the agency will change. The Secretary of Transportation will change. And I think the questions that will exist will relate to, you know, how much of the cross-modal approach that was adopted recently by this administration will continue, how the balance of what is voluntary and what is mandated will continue, you know, how are the FMVSS evolving, and so on. But a lot of what happened during the past 4 years reflected the state of the technology, the state of the industry, the state of deployment. And this administration starts at a different point with this young technology compared to the outgoing administration. So we don't know what will happen, but you know, it's obviously going to be a mix of continuity and change that reflects the circumstances. The fact that this ANPRM refers to principles suggests that there will be some durable value. You know, that they're bundling up what they've learned and what they know, and they're suggesting how to think about good paths forward. And that's much more restrictive, or much less restrictive, much more flexible than saying, oh, this is a new set of regulations that we're proposing, because that probably would not survive.
Well, my sort of comments on NHTSA have been that in the past they were dealing with crash mitigation. This has everything to do with crash avoidance.
Yes.
There's a difference between mitigation and avoidance,
yes.
fundamental yes. difference, and one should realize. Two, hopefully they won't conflate the vehicle that I own. I'm there. I'm the one that's responsible. I turn it on, I turn it off, I maintain it, I bought it, somebody sold it to me, now it's mine to deal with, as opposed to something that is providing mobility for me. to get in and have a ride. And then when I get out of the elevator, I always use the elevator analogy. I say, you know, I'm not the Donald. I don't own it. Okay, so because you know, it's somebody else's. It's somebody else's responsibility to make sure I'm safe. Okay, not mine. Okay, you haven't put it on me, which is what you've done with this thing that we've had. Those are, to me, two fundamentally different things. And I really appreciated that you went over here and dealt with this one, because very few other people have. Or did I miss it? Or I don't know, maybe I'm just not read well enough and did not, but I missed it. Okay.
Well, it sounds like one of the topics that we'll be covering, one of many, in the 4th annual Princeton Smart Driving Car Summit. Still in the planning stages. It looks like a series.
Yeah, and as soon as we get off, I'm going to grab Marjorie. I mean, this is central to this, and luckily we didn't waste our time on the trolley problem and all that junk. You know, whatever. I mean, this is so much more fundamental than that. Okay, we can't do this. We don't. There's no, we're not generating any value out of this. The value is the mobility that we provide, maybe to all of us who already have more mobility than we can shake a stick at, but certainly to the folks who don't have as many options, who are just like, my goodness, their quality of life is yeah, I mean, that to me anyway.
Well, Marjorie, thank you so very much for taking the time to be with us here. Where is it that people can go to get more information on your report?
If you go to RAN.org, the public website of RAN, you can search on Safe Enough, and you can get
Safe
a
Enough.
download.
Safe Enough, man. I mean,
Yes.
Great. It's just wonderful title, really. I mean, for all the things that we talked about, all the reasons we talked about, just the reality of the title in the end, you know?
That's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
Thank you to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more information is available at motoetf.com. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, SoundCloud, wherever you turn to for your podcast. You can even get your smart speaker to play us. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with Alain Kornhauser. Thank you for listening or watching, and please keep staying safe.
Have a great day. Thank you. And thank you, Marjorie.